I'm Eulalie Carrington, and I'll never forget the night I realized my family could watch me disappear without blinking. I was lying in a hospital bed with broken ribs, stitches in my temple, and a shoulder I could barely move. My phone sat silent for 3 days. Not a single text, not one call. When I finally picked it up, the screen lit up. 27 unread messages. For one hopeful second. I thought maybe they knew. Maybe they cared. But it was just photo after photo of my little sister Savannah at a luxury spa. Champagne in her hand. Rose petals at her feet. My mother commenting, "So cute. You deserve it, sweetie." My father tossing in a thumbs-up emoji. Not one of them asked where I was. Not one of them noticed I had vanished. That was the moment something in me cracked wide open, because sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers, but from the people who call themselves family. The impact came without a warning, one hard shove from the dark, a scream of steel, and the world flipped. The seatbelt bit into my chest. The airbag punched my face. Glass hissed like rain. Then the silence that follows disaster, heavy and unfamiliar, settled over everything. Fluorescent light. Antiseptic. A nurse asking me to track her finger. Pain blooming behind my left eye. A throb in my ribs that made each breath feel borrowed. Someone said dislocated shoulder. Someone else said 2 fractured ribs. And the word concussion floated in with the curtain. I lay there listening to the heart monitor mark time I couldn't seem to hold on to. Instinct finally edged out pride. I reached for my phone more out of reflex than hope. The lock screen was clean, no missed calls. I opened the family thread anyway. It lit up like a billboard. Savannah in a white robe. Stem of champagne tilted against a practiced smile. Savannah under a mint green clay mask. Eyes half closed like a magazine ad. Savannah in a tub of rose petals, toes painted. Captioned, "Finally healing." Below each, my mother's comments. "So cute. You deserve it, sweetie." Pink hearts stacked in neat rows. My father added a polite thumbs up, as if stamping paid on a bill. Post after post, a parade of softness and sparkle, and not a single line that said, "Where are you?" The monitor beeped on. I scrolled to the top, then back down, waiting for a question that never appeared. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. "In the hospital." I typed it, stared at it, tasted metal again, and erased every letter. I turned the phone face down on the tray table, the plastic cool against my knuckles. Let's see, I thought, if absence makes any noise at all. I closed my eyes and chose, for the first time, not to speak. 3 days passed in that sterile room, the heart monitor clicking away, as if measuring how long it would take for someone, anyone, to notice I was missing. Nobody called. Nobody asked. By the time they discharged me, I could barely lift my arm, so I slipped my hoodie over the stiff hospital gown and let it hide the truth. I rode home in silence, the seatbelt scraping against the sore bones in my chest. My apartment felt colder than the hospital. When I finally turned my phone back on, the screen lit up, dozens of missed calls, most from my father. At the top sat a single message. "Call us now. It's serious." I dialed, expecting at least a startled gasp, maybe a panicked, "Are you okay?" Instead, his voice was sharp with worry for something else entirely. Mom's backup credit card had been declined. Savannah's rent autopay failed. Phone bills bounced. He rattled through the chaos of numbers and banks, as if I were his customer service hotline. Not once did he ask where I had been. Not once did he ask how I was. And right there, in that raw silence, I understood. This was the first time in years they needed me more than I needed them. That night, the glow of my laptop washed over the apartment as I opened tab after tab. Phone contracts, car leases, streaming services, all of them still tied to my name. Every favor I had quietly carried, Mom's credit card debt, Dad's car repairs, Savannah's rent, spread out in neat rows like receipts for a life I never chose to finance. Then I found it. The spa weekend bill, the champagne, the rose petals, the whole performance, paid for on the emergency card I'd once set up for Mom. A card they had never given back. My ribs ached as I leaned closer to the screen. But I kept going. I opened a spreadsheet, line by line. Cancel autopay. Reset passwords. Freeze cards. Request removals. Each keystroke felt like pulling a plug from a machine that had been draining me dry. By the time I closed the laptop, the room was silent. For the first time, the silence felt like mine. This was the night I flipped the switch. This was the night I pulled the plug. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls stacked one after another, messages pouring in until the screen blurred. My ribs screamed each time I leaned forward to pick it up, but curiosity pressed harder than pain. The first message was from Savannah's landlord. My name appeared at the bottom of her lease as a co-signer. I had never signed a thing, yet somehow my responsibility was inked into her roof over her head. Then came a text from Mom. "Can you call the bank for me? My card isn't working again." No greeting. No, "Are you okay?" Just a command, like I was her personal help desk instead of her daughter who had crawled out of a hospital bed 2 days earlier. By midday, HR from my company called. Their tone was professional, careful. But beneath it, I heard the weight of a story being spun. Someone had called on my behalf, claiming I was unstable after the accident, asking that I be put on extended leave with pay. My own family wasn't just draining my accounts. They were reaching for my job, the one piece of my life I had built without them. I opened a new folder on my laptop and started dragging in every scrap of proof I had. Spa photos, bounced transactions, the email from HR, evidence, receipts, ammunition. That evening, scrolling through my inbox, I saw it with my own eyes. Messages written to my supervisor by strangers, pretending to be relatives, worried about my mental health. Savannah had handed them my work email. Later that night, a trusted colleague called me quietly. "There's talk you might be put on indefinite leave," she whispered. "Off the record, that rumor came from your family." I put the phone down and let the truth settle. They weren't just careless. They were deliberate. They wanted not only my money, but my name, my reputation, my future. That evening, the phone rang again, and against my better judgment, I answered. My father's voice was shaky, not angry, but pleading. "The family needs you strong, like always," he said, layering guilt into every syllable. He listed excuses, Savannah's anxiety, Mom's stress, how I should understand. I cut him off with one question. "When was the last time any of you did something for me?" The silence on the other end was so long, I thought the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "So you'll come back and help, right?" "No," I said evenly. "I already pulled the plug." A knock came not long after. My neighbor stood at the door, holding out a flash drive. "Thought you'd want this," he said. It was dashcam footage from the night of the crash. I watched as another car clipped mine on US 101, sending me spinning into the guardrail. Proof. Proof that I hadn't been reckless. Proof that the accident wasn't my fault. As the video ended, my chest tightened, not from broken ribs, but from clarity. Even when I was hanging upside down in that wreck, my family's first panic hadn't been about losing me. It was about losing access to the credit cards. That realization cut deeper than any bruise. From that moment on, I swore I would never let them turn me into their walking wallet again. The call came mid-morning. Just as I was settling in with a cup of coffee, I could barely lift. A representative from my bank asked if I'd approved a Zelle transfer of $1,200 from an old account still linked to my name. I hadn't touched that account in over a year. I told her no. Before I could hang up, another department rang through. A credit officer explained, almost delicately, that a new credit line had been requested in my name. The signature on the application read, Uleli C. My stomach tightened. Whoever had done it hadn't even bothered with subtlety. That afternoon, the mail slot clattered. A thick envelope waited on the floor, heavy with paper. Inside was my mother's looping handwriting on 3 pages of theatrics about family, resilience, and temporary setbacks. Tucked behind her words was a formal loan agreement with interest terms and a repayment schedule, all supposedly for Savannah. And beneath that, a medical authorization form, the kind that could give someone else access to my insurance and health records. I sat frozen at the kitchen table, papers spread out like a crime scene. This wasn't neglect anymore. It wasn't even manipulation. This was fraud, dressed up in family stationery. That evening, my inbox pinged. A billing notice from the Scottsdale spa arrived, confirming payment on the backup card I had once set up, just in case. They had used my lifeline to fund champagne and rose petals. I saved every document, then logged into the fraud portal, flagged every suspicious device and IP address, and uploaded the proof. I wasn't just protecting my accounts anymore, I was preparing for a courtroom. And for the first time, the fear in me shifted. If I stayed quiet, they wouldn't just rob me. They'd rewrite me. They'd paint me as unstable, incompetent, unfit to hold my own name. That thought chilled me more than any broken bone. The knock came after dark, a hesitant tap that didn't sound like a neighbor's. When I opened the door, Nate, Savannah's ex, stood there with his phone in hand. He looked embarrassed, almost sorry for showing up at all. "I thought you should see this," he said, turning the screen toward me. It was a screenshot from a group chat. My sister and my mother weaving a narrative that I had lost my mind after the accident and needed to be cut off from finances for my own safety. They were rallying friends, acquaintances, anyone who might buy the story. Nate admitted he didn't believe it at first, but the manipulation was so brazen he felt compelled to come straight to me. So I told him everything, the crash, the silence, the accounts, the forged signatures. He listened quietly. No excuses, no defense for them, just a simple nod. For the first time, I had someone outside the family who saw me clearly. Later that night, a message lit my phone. It was from my father. "I didn't know. I see it now. Sorry." 6 words. Not a solution, not redemption, but acknowledgement. Proof that at least one of them finally recognized the truth. But the night wasn't finished. I jolted awake at the sound of my lock turning. Savannah stepped into my apartment with the spare key I had once trusted her with, saying she only wanted to talk. Her eyes darted toward my desk, where my laptop and the accounts she couldn't access sat charging. I called the police, heart pounding, and she fled before they arrived. The next morning, I changed the locks and filed for a temporary restraining order. Standing in the quiet of my apartment afterward, I realized the balance had shifted. I had evidence. I had a witness. I had the law on my side. For the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped. But that clarity came with a cost. What had started as family drama had crossed a line into something darker, something legal, something permanent. There was no going back. This wasn't just a feud, it was a case waiting to happen. The county courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant, its ceilings low, its fluorescent lights humming. It wasn't the grand marble hall you see on television, just a modest room with scuffed benches and a judge who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I didn't bring anyone with me. I carried only a slim folder pressed tight against my ribs, its contents heavier than it looked. Inside were the fragments of my life they'd tried to twist and control. The dash cam video of the hit and run, the spa bill charged to my backup card, bank statements showing autopays they had bled dry. The email HR forwarded to me after my family pretended I was mentally unstable, and the loan agreement my mother had mailed with her dramatic cursive cover letter. Across the aisle, my mother sat with her chin high, eyes wet but theatrical. Savannah dabbed at her cheeks, whispering heartless under her breath. My father kept his gaze fixed on the table in front of him, refusing to meet my eyes. When the judge called my case, I stood, palms slick but voice steady. One by one, I laid out the evidence. No speeches, no dramatics, just facts, lined up like nails in a row. The room shifted when the dashcam played on the monitor. The footage was grainy, headlights cutting through rain, then the jolt as another car clipped mine, spinning me into the guardrail. For a moment, the courtroom fell silent. No one could call that carelessness. No one could pretend it hadn't happened. The judge leaned back, expression unreadable, before making his ruling. A 60-day protective order. Recognition that the forged e-signature could amount to fraud. Referral to the Civil Division for further investigation. Each word landed like a gavel of its own, pounding through the years I had spent being their silent safety net. My mother's face tightened, her performance slipping at the edges. Savannah shook her head as though disbelief might undo the evidence. My father didn't move at all. I gathered my folder and walked out of that cramped room into the thin gray light of afternoon. There was no rush of victory, no dramatic swell of triumph. What I felt instead was a release, quiet but undeniable. For the first time in years, I was no longer tethered to their chaos. I didn't leave the courthouse as a daughter who had won. I left as a woman who had finally broken free. I was done letting my mother and Savannah control the story. For weeks they had spun their version. How I had snapped after the accident. How I was cruel for cutting them off. Their whispers had reached cousins, uncles, even old family friends. It was time to put the truth in writing. I sat at my desk, opened a blank email, and began attaching everything. The photos of Savannah at the spa, the handwritten loan contract with its absurd interest rates, bank statements showing the endless drain, the vague Facebook posts begging for prayers, and finally, the dash cam video of my car being struck. I wrote no explanation, no defense, just the facts, lined up in digital form. Then, with one steady click, I sent it to every relative in my address book. The silence after sending it was heavy. Hours passed. My phone didn't buzz, not even once, until the next morning. A single reply blinked in my inbox. It was from my cousin, Marjorie. She didn't scold me. She didn't ask questions. Instead, she revealed something I had never known. The college scholarship fund my grandmother had left specifically for me had been borrowed years ago by my mother to pay down her credit card debt. Not once had anyone told me. Not once had anyone intended to repay it. Reading her words, a cold clarity settled in. This wasn't a momentary lapse. This wasn't just a few bad decisions. My family's use of me, of my name, my money, my silence, wasn't an accident. It was a system, polished and practiced, passed from one generation to the next. For the first time, I saw it plain. This story wasn't about money alone. It was about worth. About the fact that in my family's eyes, my value had only ever been measured by what I could provide. And in that moment, I finally understood. I had never been seen for who I was, only for what I could give. The move to Cannon Beach felt like exhaling after years of holding my breath. My new apartment was small, a little drafty, but it was mine. On the first morning, I carried a mug of coffee out to the balcony and let the steam curl against the cool ocean air. Below me, the waves folded and unfolded across the sand, steady, indifferent, eternal. Inside, on my desk, my laptop sat closed with a single folder tucked inside its memory. Screenshots, contracts, emails, the dashcam video. Every piece of evidence I had gathered. I didn't keep it for revenge. I kept it as proof that I had survived, that I hadn't imagined the years of being drained and dismissed. Proof that the silence I once feared had taught me everything I needed to know. My phone no longer vibrated with desperate messages, no calls demanding I fix their overdrafts, no texts pretending to check in only to beg for money. Savannah's social media had gone dark, her once constant stream of curated selfies replaced by nothing at all. My mother still posted vague updates, but without an audience, they fell flat. And my father, he said nothing. Perhaps silence was the closest thing to truth he could finally give me. It struck me then, the silence that had gutted me in the hospital, the silence that felt like abandonment, had transformed into something else. This silence was mine. It was safety. It was the sound of freedom. As the sun rose higher and the waves kept rolling in, I understood what I had never dared to before. Family isn't defined by blood, but by who shows up when your world collapses. And this time, I had chosen to show up for myself. For once, and for always, I chose me.